Rust on the Razor, Tom and Scott series, Book 6. Author, Mark Richard Zubero. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 6. I arrived, unlynched, at the clearing in front of the house. I opened the door and found Scott's mom and Shannon doing dishes in the kitchen. Mrs. Carpenter heard me, turned, grabbed a dish towel, wiped her hands, and came toward me smiling shyly. "I'm glad you came with Scott. Can I get you something? Make you a sandwich? Get you a drink of lemonade?" She was maybe 5'4" with gray hair that saw a beauty parlor at least once a week. She had on a dark brown house dress, the style Edith Bunker always wore. Deep wrinkles grooved her face from nostrils to chin. She would have looked formidable frowning, but she always seemed to be trying to smile. Shannon had yet to turn and face me. She kept wiping dishes and putting them away in appropriate cabinets. Mrs. Carpenter didn't seem to notice. She said, "I need to bring my husband a few personal things. If you want anything, let me know. Scott showed you everything when he brought you here earlier?" "Yes, Mrs. Carpenter." "I ask because you can't be sure with kids, no matter how old they get. They do seem to forget some of the most basic things. You have fresh towels?" "Yes, ma'am." "If you'll excuse me, I'm afraid my children are right. I'm going to have to get some rest." She leaned heavily on a dining room chair for a moment. I moved closer to her and held out my hand. "Can I help?" I asked. She shook her head, seemed to stretch every muscle, then nodded. "I'm old," she said. She left the kitchen and disappeared through a door on the far side of the living room. I turned back to Shannon, who was now looking at me. She slapped a plate onto the dish drainer. It cracked in half. She was about 5'9", with a slender, muscular frame and blonde hair, slightly darker than Scott's. He had told me she'd been a runner in college. Her body had athletic grace. She wore baggy sweatpants and a shapeless top. She faced me and spoke in a whisper. "You dare stay in this house? You dare defile my parents' home?" I stepped back. I said, "Everybody keeps telling me that people in the South will never confront you directly, that they'll say things behind your back, but they never insult you to your face. They'd never be that rude. I must have missed something. Maybe I'm in the wrong South?" "Rude? I was born in this house. Every one of us has good memories, wholesome memories of growing up here." "Your mother invited me." "She doesn't dare defy Scott. He's the oldest boy, so he gets special treatment. If we had our way, you wouldn't be here." "We who?" "Hiram, Nathan, and me." "But not Mary." "Mary's so sweet, just like Scott. She likes everybody, but she's not here to protect you." I wasn't aware I needed protecting. Is this some kind of threat? "I hope you get arrested for killing the sheriff. If I could find a way, I'd help implicate you so you'd get thrown in jail, then we'd get Scott back." "Why is it so difficult for so many in this family to accept the fact that Scott is gay? That he is very happy and has a good life?" "Yes, he has a good life. He's rich, and you just live off him." This was a delicate subject between Scott and me. He was not famous when we met, and, in fact, avoided telling me what he did for 3 months at first. He said he was a part-time manager of an exercise club, which was accurate. The imminent arrival of the baseball season was the impetus for him to tell me the truth. I think he'd feared I'd call the media and announce our relationship. No matter how open they are now or claim to have been, every gay person has been in some kind of closet. It might be anything from a slight hesitation about telling a new acquaintance that they're gay to attempting to keep their orientation totally hidden. So, even though I didn't like it, I understood, of course. Now, he'd call the media himself. As to the issue of money, over the years, I'd done numerous things to keep my independence. Many times he told me I could quit my job as a teacher, but I never did. I enjoy it too much, and I would never want to live off him. I rebuilt my house a while back after it burned to the ground, but I used the insurance money and my own savings. Yes, he gives me presents that are extravagant beyond my wildest imaginings as a kid, and yes, living in his penthouse on top of a building along Lakeshore Drive in Chicago is fabulous. But I didn't fall in love with him for his money, nor do I stay with him for it. I love him. I said, you and the rest of your family have benefited from his wealth directly and indirectly. From his fame, for sure. It must have been incredibly growing up as his sister. He may have been famous, but I carved my own niche as an athlete. I won some state championships, too. Of course, it was only girl stuff, so I didn't get the recognition. It was always Scott, Scott, Scott. And my hero brother turns out to be a pervert, and he brings that sin into this house. I wasn't used to fighting with the in-laws. My first big tiff had been an hour or so before with Hiram, who did little more than growl at me. Shannon at least spoke to me. I wasn't sure if this was better or not. Can we sit down? I said, please. She remained standing with the dish towel pulled taut between her fists. Just say what you have to say. Look, I said, I don't expect cheers and parades, and I'm sorry you don't like me. But I love your brother more than anything else on this earth. I would do anything for him, make any sacrifice for him. He is more precious than anything in the world to me. I'll help him through this time with his father, and he and I will leave. I wish I was more welcome, but that doesn't seem possible. If we can't begin trying to be friends, can we at least agree to be civil while I'm here to help Scott? Her eyes were those of a zealot in the face of the infidel. She turned her back on me. I gave up. I had more problems than whether my in-laws liked me or not. Upstairs, I brushed my teeth, took off everything but my underwear, and crawled between the sheets. I tossed and turned for some time, while the glow of the full moon entered through a window facing east. I fell asleep, wondering if you could see motes of dust and moonlight streaming through a window, the same way you could in sunbeams. When I awoke, it was daylight. Scott lay on top of the other bed. He was in his briefs and lying on his stomach. I stared at the white ceiling, afraid to move much for fear of waking him, although he usually slept very soundly. I hadn't heard him come in, which testified to my own state of exhaustion. Nature's needs eventually caused me to slip on some jeans and hurry to the bathroom. I re-entered the room and closed the door softly. It's okay. I'm awake, he said. He turned over on his side and propped his chin on his hand. I sat on the side of his bed. How's your dad? Slept peacefully through the night. Mama and Shannon are there. I got here about 6. What time is it? I looked at my watch. Nearly 10. He eased his head back down. I'd like to sleep for a week. I patted his arm. How's your muscle strain? Practically haven't noticed it. He grinned. You might want to massage it now. I looked around the room. Here? Now? Very definitely now. I glanced at the front of his shorts. Looks like you're in the mood for more than a massage. I know it's goofy, but sitting with my dad, I'd think about a lot of past stuff, but I'd also think about holding you and being with you and doing stuff with you, and he blushed. And what? I've always wanted to make it with a guy in my own bed in my old room at home. This does seem to be that venue. What if somebody's in the house and hears us? I told you, they left. If Nathan's here, he's outside working. He could stop in. We'll be quiet. He won't be jealous anyway. He let the fingers of his right hand slowly caress the tips of the fingers on my left hand. He stroked each finger from tip to base, moved to my palm, and then slowly onto my wrist. I remember taking one of my boyfriends in high school back to my house when I knew nobody would be home. We never made it to my room, but had a wild time in the rec room in the basement. Doing it on the couch in my parents' house was one of the hottest sexual moments of my youth. Most often, our lovemaking is slow and sensuous. This time, Scott seemed ready to let each caress take an eternity. I lay back and let his hands rove over my body, and eventually I did the same to him. When his hand began exploring the front of my pants, I pulled him to me. I swung my legs around, put one arm under his head, my hand on his hips, and pulled him close. I held his strong, muscular body tightly. The agonizingly gentle caresses were replaced with mad, passionate kisses and fierce embraces. A long while later, he breathed deeply, his mouth next to my right ear, and whispered, "That was unbelievable. I'd be content to lie here like this with you for several centuries." I held him tightly. I felt his breathing slow and his muscles relax. I let my hands gently rove over his back in slow circles. I enjoyed the feel of the weight of his body on mine. I felt warm and safe and protected. Someone knocked at the door. Scott jumped to his feet. We both pulled on pants. Scott opened the door. It was Nathan. "Didn't know if you were here," he said. "We're here," Scott said. "Any news from the hospital?" "No." I thought I caught Nathan trying to look further into the room. Was he the sex police? Or interested? "We'll be down in a few minutes," Scott said. We showered, dressed, and met in the kitchen. We had orange juice. Nathan was nowhere to be seen. "We could eat in town," Scott said. "I can fill you in on all the details from yesterday. There wasn't much time at the hospital." I phoned the library and set up a meeting with Violet for early in the afternoon. After a call to the hospital, we strode out into the humidity. "All this damp, you'd think it would pour rain," I said. "Supposed to. Tropical depression that's been developing over the Gulf of Mexico is moving in this afternoon." "We aren't going to have to evacuate or something like that." "Tropical depression is not a hurricane." "I knew that. Mostly in June, storms start over the Gulf of Mexico and don't get that strong. Not like hurricanes later on in the summer. We're not that near to the coast, so mostly we just get lots of rain. Farmers could use it." Out front was a pearl gray BMW. "Where did this come from?" "Am I fabulously rich?" "Undoubtedly. Therefore, phone calls can be made and deliveries can occur even in Bernard." I'm suitably impressed. Other than what I considered essential for a car, 4 wheels and the ability to go, this one has had blessed air conditioning. I was curious about Nathan's trying to see into the bedroom, so I asked. Nathan seemed kind of interested in what we were doing, I said. "Nah, he's straight." "Well, you hear about all these incestuous Southern Gothic sexual escapades between brothers and brothers, or brothers and sisters, and what all?" "You have got to stop being so prejudiced. I never touched any of my brothers or sisters. They never put a move on me. That's all overblown bull. I watched a few animals screw out in the barn when I was 4 or 5. It wasn't exciting then, and I ignored it the rest of the time. I was growing up. As for Nathan, I accidentally walked in on him when he was more than making out with a girl in the barn. Just thought I'd ask. He's got his own place a couple miles down the road. Got a wife and 4 kids. He kind of runs both farms now and hires help during the busy seasons. Daddy does what he can when he's in the mood." I told him everything that had happened the night before. Scott was furious at Hiram and Shannon. I thought about not telling him what they'd said, balancing the feeling of tattling with the fact that Scott was an adult. He could deal with the information any way he saw fit. My general policy was that withholding information was childish and stupid. This noon we chose to dine at the exquisite and well-appointed Huddle House. A bright-eyed and bubbling teenager served us. She seemed quite pleasant and unaffected by the word on us. In the newspaper boxes out front, the death of the sheriff held the headlines. Scott's presence in town was little more than a sports page squib. Mostly speculation about whether he was really in the South for his father's illness or merely in hiding because of the headlines. Scott was more concerned about family politics than he was about the sports world. "I'll talk to Hiram and Shannon," he said. "They may not like my being gay, but this is bullshit. As for that crap you heard Hiram and Nathan saying the other night," he sighed. "I tried talking to Nathan last night. I think he listened. It's this damn religious stuff down here that makes it so tough. Shannon and Hiram are real religious. Nathan told me Hiram had joined Reverend Hollis's church. That's not going to help. Plus, I think they believe that I betrayed my family. Somehow, all these headlines reflect on them, like I chose to be gay." "Is it worth a family fight at a time like this?" I asked. He thought a minute. "If there's a good time to say something, I will. I guess it'll depend some on how Daddy's doing. Did that young cop really admit to dancing in Atlanta?" "Yeah, sure did. I wouldn't mind seeing one of his performances. At least it gave us some leverage. I don't think that stuff about Hiram and the sheriff was important. Those kinds of fights aren't big deals around these parts." I kept silent. I wasn't eliminating anybody from my list of possible suspects, no matter what their relationship to Scott. "Do you know anything about a guy named Jasper Williams? Local eccentric, skinhead, and Buddy Nazi." "No, never heard of him. The town eccentric, when I was growing up, was Theodore Horst. He owned a flower shop on the square. He lisped and swished. I thought that's what it meant to be gay. It was part of the reason it took me so long to come out to myself. I thought I'd have to be like him." We finished eating and returned to the car. "I'm supposed to meet Violet later," I said. "You can go to the hospital and I can try and keep from being arrested." He dropped me off at the library. Today, Violet wore a bright yellow and green flower print dress. She introduced me to Lisa, the woman taking her place at work. Lisa shook my hand and said, "I'm happy to meet you. I hope you don't think everyone in this town is in the hands of the preachers and the bigots. There's lots of folks who are sympathetic. Of course, they're afraid some. But I know you didn't kill the sheriff. He was a mean man." "How so?" I asked. "Us kids used to just hang out in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly. That's the grocery store. On Friday and Saturday nights. Used to be we could just be there to talk to our friends. But the last few years he'd come by, not just send a deputy to warn us, and he'd get all ugly. Nobody liked it, but we couldn't complain to our parents. He was just being mean. I sympathized with this dastardly behavior." "Violet says y'all might talk to Jasper Williams." I nodded. "You be careful. All of us kids grew up scaring each other with stories about him. I know kids do that a lot. Try to scare each other, but we all know Jasper's a mean man." I thanked her for the warning. Violet grabbed an oversized bag and we left. "Who do you want to talk with first?" she asked. She started the Cadillac and turned on the air conditioning. "I'd like to begin with Clara Thornton. She seems to be the biggest honcho around here, and she had the nerve to stand up to Peter Woodall." "I thought you might." I called and set up an appointment. We drove directly to the courthouse. Outside, a few people sat on cement benches in the shade. Inside, the floors were highly polished wood. The walls were painted beige with black and white photos of the early days of the courthouse, showing mules, horses, buggies, and people traversing the unpaved street. Clara Thornton's office was in the front on the second floor. She had a light orange rug, blonde chairs, a teak desk, and several filing cabinets. Each wall had two paintings of antebellum homes, classical and Gothic revival on one, Federal and Regency on the other. Clara put on her gold-rimmed glasses and stood to meet us. She wore a black skirt, a white blouse with a Peter Pan collar and strands of pearls around her neck. Violet formally introduced us. Clara's watery gray eyes stared at me uncompromisingly. She said, "I agreed to see you, Mr. Mason, because Violet asked me. I was also intrigued, maybe even pleased, when you held your temper with Peter in the Waffle House. I admire self-control." "It took a lot," I said. "Don't mistake me," she said. "I appreciate what you did, but I'm not fond of you or your lifestyle." "What lifestyle is that?" I asked. "The one where I teach school? The one where I go home and read books? The one where I go to movies and eat dinner, or laugh or cry or care for someone I love? Or the one where I have a mother and father and brothers and sisters who I love and care for as much as they love and care for me?" Violet said nothing to interrupt me. Clara said, "You're very bold for someone who is a thin line away from being arrested for murder." I spoke very quietly. "I didn't kill anyone. I found the body, and now I'm going to find the killer, since the local police don't seem to be interested in doing that." "Insulting me won't help that," Clara asked. "Treating me like dirt, talking down to me, won't find out who killed the sheriff." "Depends if I really care who killed the sheriff, and if I really care what happens to you, doesn't it?" "I appreciate your honesty," Violet said. "Clara, I know you've had a feud with the sheriff for years. Everybody in the county knows it. And you think that makes me a murder suspect?" She smiled for about 2 seconds and laughed for maybe 5. "It makes you a better suspect than me," I said. "Maybe I'll talk to Judge Collins, convince him to have you arrested. I don't know what kind of pull your lawyer friend had, but we folks in this county have our ways as well." "What did you feud with the sheriff about?" Violet asked. "You know as well as I do, Violet, there are a few secrets in this county." "I know that you didn't like each other," Violet said, "but I haven't really been in town much since I was a kid." I said, "Mrs. Thornton, I understand you don't like me. I apologize if my words a few minutes ago offended you. I feel cornered and trapped just being in this town, and since I discovered the body, I've been pretty uptight. I'd like to do what I can to clear my name. It looks like solving the crime is the only way for that to happen. I'd appreciate any help you can give me." She picked up a gold pen from the top of her desk and tapped it against the blotter. She took off her glasses and leaned back in her chair. She looked from Violet to me. She said, "I don't like homosexuals. I hope the preachers can organize and make a concerted statement. I hope we don't have an uproar in this town, but we're starting to get lots of publicity. I've heard rumors of a homosexual rights activist coming to town, and I've been told the Atlanta papers are sending people here. Some tabloid creature was annoying people this morning in the Waffle House. The connection with the famous Scott Carpenter and a possible murder is a tremendous lure." She thought for a moment more, then leaned forward in her chair and propped her elbows on the top of the desk. "Being elected county commissioner, the past couple of elections has not been easy. These men would like to get me out. A big blow-up about this case in the press would be bad. But if you didn't do it, and they look stupid because of how they handled it, I'd be able to use it against them." Abruptly, she pulled her chair closer to her desk and said, "The sheriff liked to collect secrets, and that's how he preferred getting elected. If someone did something, he might or might not arrest him." "I don't understand," I said. "Say the bank president's son was arrested for possession of marijuana. A reasonably serious offense in this county and in this state. Maybe the sheriff would go to the bank president and talk to him. Then the kid got off. The next election, one of Peter's big supporters would be the bank president." "This happened?" "Just an example. You'll have to find the specifics. The only reasonably solid rumor I've ever got was that the sheriff had come some dirt on Al Holcomb." "Even I know he's the Klan leader in town," I said. "So does everybody. That wouldn't be the secret he'd hold over his head. I've always kind of wanted to know what that secret is." When I first took office, Peter tried to bully me by threatening to reveal things from my husband's past, but I dared him to do his worst. He never did try. Came in the first day I was in office and tried to get me to knuckle under. And that's why I've always hated him. How dare he? What do you have on your husband? I asked. None of your business. We all paused at this barrier for a second. I asked, who else in town had a grudge against him? Everybody tiptoed delicately around the sheriff. You might try Wainwright Richardson, county coroner, and your immediate nemesis. There's a feud there that goes way back. I know their families openly quarreled for a while in the late 40s. Don't know about what. My husband probably knew, but he didn't pass any political information on to me. I've had to win elections without threatening anybody. I've just had to do a good job. Did the sheriff get along with his wife? I asked. I haven't heard about any problems. She stayed home to raise the kids, had one almost 9 months to the day after they got married. In the hallway after the interview, I said, I'm sorry about getting annoyed with her and letting it show, but I'm tired of being the stepped-on pansy in this town. They aren't used to an uppity queer, Violet said. They'll survive. Richardson's office is downstairs. Let's try him before we leave. His room was not as large, but in most other respects it was identical to Clara's, except his pictures were of battleships, aircraft carriers, and submarines. Richardson wore a charcoal gray suit and smoked a pipe. He did not ask our permission if he could light up. He pulled a pouch out of his top left drawer, inserted the tobacco into his pipe, tamped it down, lit it, and blew smoke rings in our direction. It actually smelled pretty good, sort of a cherry flavor. Working on getting you arrested, he said. Working on finding out who really killed him, I said. Violet said, Wainwright, we need help. He turned to her. I don't see why you're helping him, Violet. It's all around town about you driving up here with him this afternoon. Somebody thought they might have seen you two together last night. Wainwright, she asked, aren't you interested in finding out who killed the sheriff? I don't want both of these jobs, Wainwright said. I'd prefer to be coroner of Bernard County. I'm not interested in this sheriff business, and I don't want to investigate. I want to just get done with my job and get in as much fishing as I can. You're going to convict me because you're too lazy. You don't like honesty. What did your family quarrel about with the sheriffs? Violet asked. Who told you that? Clara. Should have kept her mouth shut. None of us spoke as Wainwright puffed on his pipe for several moments. Finally he said, That quarrel can't have anything to do with why the sheriff died. What was it? Violet asked. Peter's daddy and I served in the same outfit in World War II, and we saw action together in Africa and Italy. He accused me of being a coward in the war and tried to get people here to believe it. His daddy was an ignorant blowhard, but some people will believe anything. I never had a quarrel with Peter, but his daddy was unforgiving. I suppose it didn't help that I bought as much land around his property as I could. When Peter inherited his land, I tried to buy it from him. He never was much of a farmer. Practically drove himself and all his kin to bankruptcy. He may have had reason to kill me, but I had no reason to kill him. My family started with more money, and I made the family richer. Peter was almost broke when he became sheriff. He got elected because he was a sports hero in high school. Of course, it could have been worse. What if Scott Carpenter had stayed in town? He was such a hero. He could have gotten himself elected anything, and look where we'd be. A homosexual sheriff. Is the autopsy report on the sheriff in yet? I asked. I've gotten some reports. It would help if I could get some details about his death. Was he drugged? Did he struggle? Where was he? Wainwright laughed. Why would I have to give my prime suspect that information? You should know it already. I can tell you one little thing. We found plenty of your fingerprints at the scene. We're going to take your buddy's so we can eliminate his. You'll find everybody's prints who's rented the car or who worked at the car rental agency. Prints don't mean anything. I'm going back to Judge Collins with the state's attorney again today. Maybe this time we'll get a warrant. I was surprised when you pulled that much power out of a hat. I thought we had you. He would tell us no more, and moments later he stood up and led us out of the room. His secretary said, Mr. Wainwright, there are reporters outside the door, 3 or 4 of them. One is from the Truth Express, that horrible gossip paper. Can you let us out a quieter way? Violet asked. Richardson puffed on his pipe once or twice and then grinned. They'll find you. This town isn't that big, but sure. He opened a side door and ushered us into a narrow hallway and then into a vacant courtyard. He pointed to a door on the opposite wall. That way. He turned and left. Outside the door was a man in his mid-20s. He wore faded blue jeans, a blue and white striped shirt, and a brightly colored tie. He was 5'9" and maybe all of 130 pounds. His most striking facial feature was a sea of prominent zits. I knew I picked the right door, he said. I knew you wouldn't want to come out the front way. Those national reporters aren't so goddamn smart. Yes! He jerked his left arm in the annoying pumping gesture of triumph currently popular. Light from fluorescent tubes overhead glinted off his silver wire-rimmed glasses. I'm from the Burr County Clarion, he continued. Aren't you Dennis? Violet asked. Mrs. Hale's boy. I thought you were at college. I graduated last year. I've been working for the paper. They've got everybody trying to dig up stuff about Scott Carpenter's past. Talking to everybody who knew him. He pointed to me. Nobody seems to care a lot about you, except as a murder suspect. We stood in the back entrance of the courthouse and watched enormous black clouds drifting toward us from the southeast. Don't they care who killed the sheriff? I asked. Everybody thinks you did it. The regular courthouse reporter on the paper just calls Wainwright Richardson or goes over to the police station and talks to all his buddies. But you don't have any contacts, I said. No, sir. Plus, I don't think you did it. Thank you. I want to help, and to be honest, if I get the real story, it'll be a big boost to my career. It could make the wire services, and I could get out of this town. You could leave now, I said. Gotta be some jobs in bigger towns for kids just out of journalism school. Not many at all. I tried for 6 months for the last 2 weeks in Nashville. I only had enough money to buy eggs and day-old bread. I appreciate your offer of help, I said. I don't know if it could be trusted, and I figured I was going far enough relying on Violet. I know you don't have a reason to trust me, and I'm not going to say that some of my best friends are gay, although there were gay guys at the university. Some are okay, some not. Like everybody else, I've got a girlfriend, so I'm not some closet case. I just think you've gotten a raw deal, and maybe I could hitch my career to the truth. I wouldn't mind that. Make some of these people realize what a good reporter they lost. What do you think, Violet? I asked. It's not like you've got so many friends in town that you can afford to be picky. She smiled at Dennis. You might not remember, but I do, Dennis. I used to babysit for you when you were little. You used to always bring books and more books for me to read to you. You asked me once what these were. She pointed to her breast. And then you tried to grab one. You were precious at 5. Dennis blushed. Did I really? I held your little hand carefully that night. She laughed. We need all the help we can get. What's the plan? Dennis asked. First of all, we're trying to find out the results of any of the police tests. He shook his head. I can't help you there. The cops would never tell me any secrets if Jackson, he's the courthouse reporter, has information. He'll never give it to me. I'm just a twerp to him. He just tells me to shut up. do the obits and attend the meetings that he thinks are boring. We might have a contact on that, Violet said. She didn't name Cody or how we could get the information. Dennis might be on our side, but why test his gentle loyalty with one of our best pieces of leverage? Who else have you talked to besides Clara and Wainwright? I gave him a look. Well, it's not a big secret. Everybody saw you walk in. Wasn't hard to find out where you've been. What we need to know are people who didn't like the sheriff or people he had secrets on, who might have been scared of him. Somebody with a motive to kill him. Well, I don't know, Dennis said. I'm pretty young to know that kind of stuff, and I've been away at college. Nobody at the paper would confide that kind of stuff to me, although Dr. McLarty stopped me this morning and wanted to know what I knew about the murder. He also asked if I talked to you and if I knew where you were staying. That's Scott's dad's doctor, I said. You think he knows something? We should at least talk to him, Violet said. I'd also like to talk to this Jasper Williams, I said. If he's the local Nazi, he might be capable of anything. Supposedly he's harmless, but we heard a story about some hikers that showed him capable of violence. Jasper is high on my suspect list. He is crazy, Dennis said. That's what Lisa indicated at the library. I'm not sure where exactly he lives, Violet said. Certainly not so that I could drive out there. Plus, I wouldn't want to go. It's someplace in Thomas Jefferson Swamp, and it's supposed to be really strange. It's not just a rumor, Dennis said. I've been there once. Why on earth for? Violet asked. It was a big joke at the paper. They do it to all the new kids, send them out to talk to Jasper. It was sure strange out there. He was in my class at school. Everybody avoided him. He dropped out in 9th grade, and nobody missed him. Did he used to torture animals and set fires? I asked. No. Why? Should he? Classic patterns of a serial killer, I said. I don't know about that. He was just weird, talked to himself. He slapped a teacher in 1st grade, bit a girl in 3rd grade. Mostly he kept very quiet. He never raised his hand and sat by himself at lunch. During all of 6th grade, whenever he walked anywhere, he would goose-step. Fat little nerdy kid, all those years. What happened when you went out there? It was freaky. I left in a hurry. Why? He hesitated, then shrugged. I never actually saw him. It's just, well, I just heard this whispery voice telling me to go, so I went. He seemed uninclined to elaborate. I wondered how frightened he'd been. Telling the story with an elaborate amount of detail might damage his code of masculinity. We have anybody else in town to talk to? I asked. Violet said, while you're out trying to talk to Jasper, I can try to see Leota. I don't think it's a good idea for you to go with me to see her. You being a suspect and all. I agreed. Plus, Violet continued, I can try and find out some of that police report material. Be careful out there. Don't turn your back on him. She gazed at the darkening horizon to our south and east. If it starts to rain hard, get out of that swamp. We had a dry spring and it hasn't rained but 1/4 inch for 6 weeks. Dennis said, it could rain a foot and it wouldn't raise the level of the swamp much. Just be careful, Violet warned. She got in her Cadillac while Dennis and I walked to the other side of the square and got into his Volkswagen Beetle. It was painted a dull brown and did not have air conditioning. He shifted gears and pulled out. You know, it's not going to be a secret you're helping me, I said. Half the town must have seen us talking together. I don't care if they think I'm gay. I know I'm not. You don't think it'll hurt your career if you're seen with the #1 murder suspect in the history of the county? I'm not going to be hanging around this burg that long, and you're not the biggest killer ever in these parts. Who is that honor? Billy Joe Barnett, back in the 1890s. Did in most of his kin one hot summer night. Biggest flood ever in the county. It had stopped raining, but the waters were still rising. Thought he could get away with it by drowning them. All in the rush of water, rescue workers came by in time to see him holding his Aunt Jessie's head underwater. We drove out the same road that led to Scott's house, but instead of turning at the first left past the second crumbling gas station, we continued straight for at least another 15 miles. "How'd you find your way the first time?" I asked. They've got a mimeographed set of directions at the paper that they drag out, and you remember the way. As long as you get the first turn correct, you can't miss it. Once you're off this road, you take every fork or possible turn to the right." He slowed down. When we got about a mile past a little red schoolhouse that looked like it came right out of first grade primer, Dennis said, "This is the tough part." A car behind us honked and then sped past. On our left, giant, sweeping yellow trees bent their branches all the way to the road. The more violent gust of a rising wind whipped the branches nearly horizontal. A few fat raindrops spattered down on the car, then stopped. Going slowly caused the breeze from the windows to die, and between gusts of wind, the car was nearly unbearable. "A hell of a lot of humidity in the air," I said. "About the same as usual. Still, we could get a mess of rain." His eyes inspected the left side of the road carefully. "There it is." He pulled through what looked to be little more than a gap between two trees. "Are you sure?" I asked as the car bucked and rocked over what even the most generous person might call an ill-used cattle path. Tree branches and leaves pushed against the car. "Yeah, this is right," Dennis said. "I remember it clearly." "Any particular leaf that looks familiar, or just all of them?" Trees hemmed in the car on both sides, and above, the darkening gloom of the afternoon, combined with the shadows of the trees, made this a twilight world I wasn't happy to be entering. Maybe it would be a good idea to invite Jasper to tea at high noon with half the National Guard in attendance, instead of trying this mad trail. Moments later, the car stopped bouncing as much, and the trees thinned a little. "Great," Dennis said. "This is perfect. We've only got a few miles to go." I was suspicious of his enthusiasm. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested. "Will, if you want, but I thought you needed to talk to this guy." A path forked to the right, and Dennis slowly turned onto it. For a few minutes, my paranoia fought with my need to find the killer. It was daylight, and I wasn't alone. "I guess we'll keep going," I said. 2 right turns later, the wind died down, and it began to rain. No thunder and lightning, and it wasn't a downpour. Just a steady afternoon shower. You'd think with only right turns we'd simply arrive back where we started, but because the serpentine path we followed angled and twisted numerous times, it didn't seem to matter that at every fork or junction we took the way to the right. The rain drummed on the car, and the engine snarled and whined, and that way the old Volkswagen Beetles have, as if the engine were twice as large as it really is. "Snakes in here?" I asked. "Yeah. Deadly ones." "Yeah? I don't want to hear about it." "Okay, as long as you're here. Can I ask, what is it like living with Scott Carpenter and being gay and all this coming out stuff?" "When all this is over, if we need a reporter, we'll call you. Right now, I'd rather concentrate on catching a killer." Can't blame me for trying. I lost count of the number of turns we made. The first rumble of far-off thunder came about 10 seconds after Dennis stopped the car. "Why are we stopping?" I asked. He pointed to the left. "See that barrel stave around the base of the tree?" That's his marker. It's the only left we take. We drive a couple of 100 feet to the end of a lane. Then we have to walk about 100 feet beyond that to get to its place. We're going to walk in the rain, aren't we? Unless you know a way of running between the drops. We turned onto the lane and drove for less than a minute. The thunder and lightning were still distant and infrequent as we got out of the car. As we took our first steps, the rain increased. My head and shirt were soaked in seconds. "This is nuts," I said. We followed a muddy path, the only sign that humans might be present. About 100 feet in, as Dennis had said, we came to a clearing about 50 feet wide. On the other side was a small cabin. Between us and it was an enormous cross with a 6-foot cross piece and a 10-foot pole embedded in the ground. It was obvious that it had recently been set on fire. Water dripped off a small animal skull that had been nailed to the top of the cross with a large metal spike. I shuddered and looked beyond it to the cabin. The one window I could see had a lace curtain. An aluminum screen door hung in the entrance. It gleamed as if it had been polished. The front of the cabin was maybe 15 feet wide. The tips of nails shone on the porch, holding down what looked like newly sawed and regularly spaced pieces of wood. The entire structure was set up on pilings about a foot above the ground. "You sure he lives here?" "He has for years." I pointed to the space under the cabin. "It flood much here?" He shrugged. "Protects against snakes, too." We crossed the clearing and stepped onto the porch. It seemed sturdy and well made. It was a delight to be out of the rain. Drops covered Dennis's glasses. He pulled out his shirt tail to try and dry them. I knocked on the screen door. There didn't seem to be an inner door. No one answered my knock. I peered through the screen. The cabin seemed to consist of one large room. To the right was a cot, the corners of which were tucked in with military precision. A row of cupboards stretched halfway around the far wall. Below them was a stainless steel sink, a small white refrigerator, and a Franklin stove. I knocked again. "Nobody home," I said. Then I heard the ka-chunk of a shotgun being pumped. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.